On to business with Charles Pellegrin, who's joining us. Tariffs back in the headlines once again. In July, aren't they?
Apologies to everyone watching. Just as a reminder, Donald Trump in early April imposed what he called reciprocal tariffs on countries around the world in a bid to rebalance trade deficits and bring back manufacturing jobs to the United States. But market turmoil, especially on the bond market, forced him to temporarily lower all these tariffs to 10% a few days later and start a 90-day negotiation period where deals were supposed to be struck with individual countries. Well, that 90-day period is supposed to end on Wednesday. So where are we now? Deals have only been struck with the UK and Vietnam and to a certain extent China, but the ball is still up in the air for the rest of the world with negotiations ongoing or stuck, depending on how you look at it. So on Monday, Donald Trump sent letters to 14 countries, which you see there, threatening higher rates, but also extending that negotiation deadline to August 1st. Japan and South Korea, for instance, could face 25% tariffs. That's the same as previously for South Korea, but 1 percentage point higher for Japan. And South Africa could face a 30% tariff unless a deal is struck. President Ramaphosa this Tuesday responding by saying that both trade negotiators and businesses in the country should pursue diversification efforts at the same time as pursuing negotiations with Washington. He also said that 30% rate was not reciprocal. According to their data, the average tariff rate on imported goods to South Africa actually stands at 7.6%. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, meanwhile, maintained that Japan's own interests will be defended in any deal with the U.S.
The Japanese government will avoid easy compromises. We have been working hard on the negotiations to insist on what we need and to protect what we need to protect. There will be an impact on Japan's domestic industries and employment. The government will take all necessary measures to mitigate these effects during the negotiations.
Well, Japan and South Korea are the most important trade partners in that list, aren't they, Trade Guru?
The two East Asian nations exported $280 billion worth of goods to the U.S. last year. Cars and car parts were a huge part of that and are responsible for the trade deficits that Donald Trump is so concerned about. Last year, Japan exported $68.5 billion worth of goods more to the U.S. than the U.S. did to Japan. And for South Korea, that figure stands at $66 billion. And this truly makes negotiations very difficult. Trump wants to see more car manufacturing in the U.S., but the auto sector is a huge part of both the Japanese and South Korean economies, and they are very politically important. And this is at a politically important time. Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba facing elections in the upper house later in the month, which makes concessions difficult. South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung only took office last month with promises to defend national interests. So one particular sticking point is that both these countries want a deal to also include an agreement on sector-specific tariffs the U.S. has threatened to slap on things like cars or metals. So the pressure is on to find some sort of common ground in the next 3 weeks.
Luckily for us, Charles is also a market guru. What's the latest on those, Charles?
I really don't know about those qualifications. Definitely the major consideration on investors' minds right now are those tariffs. And we're actually seeing gains this hour on the Asian markets, perhaps a sign that there's relief that there was another deadline extension and that the new rates aren't too different from the ones previously applied. We're also seeing shares trading higher at the open in Europe. The EU also negotiating with the US with that deadline coming on Wednesday. Unclear whether the EU will receive a letter like the other countries.
Now to that BRICS summit. The two-day BRICS summit is wrapped up in Rio de Janeiro.
And it seems that the bloc centered around emerging economies has caught the eye of Donald Trump as the United States gears up to applying wide-reaching tariffs that threatened to impose in April. The U.S. president warned any nation aligning itself with BRICS would come in for extra levies, sparking the ire of the hosting nation's president, Lula da Silva. Luke Schrager with the details.
It should have been a two-day summit about economic cooperation with emerging economies, but after criticism of Washington's trade strategies, international bickering ensued.
Any country aligning themselves with the anti-American policies of BRICS will be charged an additional 10% tariff. There will be no exceptions to this policy.
Brazilian host and leader Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva wasn't slow to clap back.
I don't think it's very responsible or serious for the president of a country as big as the United States to go around threatening the world through the internet. We don't want an emperor.
The BRICS economic bloc has swelled beyond original members Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, and now accounts for half the world's population and around 40% of its economic output. Among them, both US archenemies and allies. And while leaders like China's Xi Jinping and Russia's Vladimir Putin stayed away from the actual summit, hoping to keep a lower profile, both Moscow and Beijing insisted they weren't looking for a fight.
BRICS is an important platform for cooperation in emerging markets and developing countries. It calls for openness, inclusiveness and win-win cooperation and does not engage in confrontation or target specific countries. China has repeatedly stated there are no winners in trade or tariff wars, and protectionism leads nowhere.
South Africa, too, insisted it wasn't seeking to compete with any other power. It already faces a 31% tariff rate if it fails to reach a deal with Washington. Punishing US tariffs unveiled in April were due to come into force on Wednesday, a date that now seems will slip to August 1st, according to Donald Trump, offering nations a 3-week reprieve.
Charles, thanks very much. I'll be Pellegrin with the business on France 24. Straight to